Hello, dear students. As the midterm exams are approaching closer to us, I thought that I will make a video on most relevant chapter in class 10, that is chapter number 4, Agriculture. There are the two chapters, chapter 1 and chapter 4. Even the map work is also there from the water resources, but the question answers they will be asked only from chapter 1 and chapter 4. For chapter 1 we have done a lot of revision already, so as we don't have much time, that's why I decided to make a video for chapter number 4, that is agriculture. As you can see here, agriculture describes the practice of growing crops or rearing animals. The Latin root of agriculture is agri, or that is the field, plus cultura, that the cultivations. Cultivating a piece of the land or planting and growing food plants on it is largely what agriculture means. In another word, if you want to say, agriculture is art and science of growing crops and rearing animals. If you talk about agriculture and in Indian concern, it has a lot of significance. You see here, India is an agriculturally important country, not only because of its production. It is most important in providing employment as well. More than 50% people, they are directly engaged with agriculture, or you can say that they are farmers only. If we add some other things, then agriculture, people directly and indirectly associated with the agriculture, and their number is much larger. In India, agriculture is a primary activities. Actually, when we talk about in that, in most of the developing countries and backward countries, agriculture is considered as the primary activities because people depend on agriculture for their domestic requirement. As earlier I have mentioned that in India, definitely agriculture provides employment to the large number of the people. But that is not the only significance of agriculture. You are aware about this, that many industries, they depend directly on agriculture. Can you imagine cotton textile industry, sugarcane industry, jute industry, leather industry without the support of agriculture? Definitely. Even they are, these all these industries directly depend on agriculture. So agricultural productivity of these crops may influence the productivity of industries. Types of farming. Farming, when we talk about the type of the farming, it means that the way in which, different ways in which people grow crops. All through the world, there are the different ways, different methods, different technologies people use to grow crops. So the type of the farming, later in the coming slides we will discuss about it, but usually a question can be asked that what are the factors responsible for the variation in agriculture or in farming, or you can say that the why there are different types of farming. So there are the certain factors on which the type of farming depends. First one, and it is physical factors. Physical environment. Children, we are aware about it that agriculture, and it has very close relation with the environment of the region. If we talk about the environment, then it includes climate, and in climate, temperature and rainfall. As we know that they are the most important elements for a crop. With that, soil is also very important, and soil is also the part of physical environment. So whatever the physical environment of that region, it means whatever the atmospheric conditions like rainfall, like temperature, and the soil, and according to this people grow crops. Next is technological level. Children, you are aware about it that people in the different part of the world, and they do or they perform practice agriculture in the different ways, and it is based on the tools and technologies they use. In I'm telling you that in you can take the example, certain examples like maize. Okay, it is grown in India as the food crops, but in United States of America, it is a very important commercial crop. I think you are aware about the great maize belt of North America. So it depends on the level of the technologies. Next is socio-cultural practices. When we talk about the agriculture, and especially in the developing and backward countries, people grow crops that is consumed or used by them as a food crop. So the food is important part of our culture. Our food habits are important part of our culture, and our food habits are based what we grow in our surroundings. That's why people different parts in the different part of the world, and they eat different crops, and whatever they eat they prefer to grow. Next is demand for a product. It is very clear that if any productivities, any commodity, agricultural commodities that is having more demand in the market, they have the higher values, higher prices, and because of this, farmers, there are the two purposes. Okay, first, farmers grow crops to sustain, to meet their families' food needs, and second, to sell in the market. And they will sell, or they will prefer to grow the crops from which they can get higher economical values. Next is availability of labor. Uh, Suppose that if we talk about in area of Southeast Asia, here people and they practice intensive subsistence farming because they are having sufficient number of the laborers, while you compare it with the Canada, as the number of the laborers are not available or cheaper labor is not available. That's why they use machines and they grow the crops. Those can be grown, sown, harvested easily with the machines. As earlier we have discussed that there are certain factors, and on these factors there are certain types of the agriculture, and in this you can see the flow chart. You can see one, it is subsistence farming. It's a two categories. One is the primitive, and second is intensive subsistence farming. Primitive subsistence farming further can be categorized as shifting farming, and nomadic hirings. Second is commercial agriculture. We are aware, as its name suggests. So, what is the purpose of this type of agriculture? And even it can be categorized in the many categories, but two are more common. One, it is the commercial grain farming, and second is plantation. Primitive subsistence farming. In exam, usually it is asked what are the features of primitive subsistence farming. Okay, so one thing, first we need to understand what is the primitive subsistence farming. As its name suggests, it is one of the oldest form of agriculture, and purpose of this type of farming is subsistence of the family need, to meet the need of families. So one oldest form of agriculture where people grow crops to meet their family requirement. So their features, characteristics are: first, for family subsistence. As earlier we have discussed that it is mainly practiced in the areas, especially in the hilly areas or in the deep forested areas where much land is not available. So people on a small patches of the land, they grow some crops or vegetables which help or support their family needs. Main occupation of the people is hunting and gathering. Especially the women and children, they practice such type of farming. Uh, this type of farming, and it provides a very small output. As earlier I have mentioned that it is not the main activity of that areas or those people. Okay, it is likely a supportive activity, because main occupation of the people, main source of their food is hunting and gathering. But as women, they get extra time, that's why they clear a small patches of the land, and on this they grow some common food crops or mainly vegetables. Next is traditional tools. Children, these type of the agriculture, and they farmers, as most of them are the tribal people, they are not educated, they live in an isolated areas, and they use, first thing that they most probably they don't use any tools, and whatever the tools they use, they are primitive, they are very old. Usually they use sticks, they use hose, they use plows, or very common tools which can be framed or made easily with the material available in their local environment. Next is, this type of farming depends on rainfall only. Farmers, they don't use any means of irrigations. They just, during the rainy seasons, they sow the seeds, and then they just look after their crops from the animals, and then they harvest to get the food materials. So they don't use any kind of the irrigation facilities. Next is natural fertility of soil. This type of the agriculture, and it depends. One reason that the soil is already very fertile, because in forest areas, in hilly areas, soil has sufficient amount of humus in it, and they don't use the same piece of the land for the longer times. They use it only for 3 to 4, 5 years, and then they shift to the new places. So they don't use any kind of the fertilizers, manure to make the soil fertile. Next is environmental suitabilities. As we have discussed about it, that whatever the areas, okay, if it is that tropical areas, polar areas, or desert areas, people grow crops which grow in those kinds of environment. Next is, with decreased soil fertility, farmers shift to another land, and that's why it is also known as the shifting farming. As we know that if anyone continuously use the same piece of the land and for the same crops, gradually soil loses its fertility, and as they don't use any fertilizer in growing crops, that's why after certain periods, when they find that the soil is now not much fertile, they shift from that areas. Next is, in this type of the farming, only family members are involved. There is no provision of labor or workers. As earlier we have discussed that it is not big, or you can say that the very productive, and that's why mostly women, children, or those are not capable to go for hunting and gathering, they usually engage with this type of agriculture. And last is separate in thickly forested areas. As earlier I have mentioned that this type of agriculture, and we can find it in isolated areas. Those are away from the modern society's reach. That's why in the hilly areas, in the forested areas, such type of farming can be seen. One form of this is slash and burn agriculture. Okay, as its name suggests that the farmers actually, as earlier I have mentioned that in primitive farming, people don't use any kind of the tools, machines. So without tools or without machines, it is difficult to clear land. But they use a simple practice that they burn the forest area of a particular region, and after burning they use the same piece of the land for growing crops. That's why it is known as the burn slash and burn agriculture. As it is mentioned here, a method of cultivation in which forests are burnt and cleared for planting. The ash provides some fertilizations. Okay, so after burning, that the remaining material, that is you can say that that provides some you can say good contents for the growing crops. After several years of the cultivations, as the fertility declines and weeds increases, they leave that piece of the land and then they move to the another areas. It is uh, practiced to sustain family needs. There is no other purpose, neither industrial nor commercials, purely for family requirement. Productivity is low, as they don't use any fertilizers nor any pesticides, and even they don't use any machines, tools, modern technologies. There is no research on it. That's why their productivity is very low. And next is, there are the major crops, that is the coarse food grains and vegetables, which can be easily grown without, you can say that even it can be grown on the zero tillage areas. This type of agriculture, and it is very common all parts of the world. In India, in different parts of country, it is known by the different names. In the northeastern states, it is very popular. It is the zooming farming. Okay, in the area of Assam mainly, and in other northeastern states. In Chhattisgarh, it is known as Deepa. In other states, as we know that they are known with these names. This type of the farming, and it is also very popular or common, not popular but very common everywhere. Especially you see in the tropical areas. In Mexico and Central America, it is a milpa. In Brazil, it is a roca. It is in Central Africa, Masol, Indonesia, Ladang, Vietnam, Ray, Sri Lanka, it is known as Chena. So it is a universal farming that is found in tropical areas, difficult areas for transportations, or in isolated patches, isolated areas. Children, now we are moving to the next topic, and it is intensive farming. But to explain the term intensive farming, there is a term, and it is the right of inheritance. As we know that India and mostly the Hindus, it is the male-dominated society, and earlier it was a provision that the property passed from father to sons only. But after this right of inheritance act, now daughters, wives, and son, they have equal share in the land, and because of this, the land's holding or land size is getting smaller and smaller. That's why people in India, they have the smaller land holding size. If we compare with the United States of America, there is a big difference in the land holdings, because in India the population is higher, population density as well, and because of this, the same property, the land has its limitations, and because of this, gradually land is divided further, and because of this, it is getting smaller. Now it is intensive subsistence farming. Okay, as see, very small holdings, and the reason of very small holdings, it is higher populations, right of inheritance. Okay, now you try to understand what is the intensive subsistence farming. As I am telling you earlier, that the size of the land is very small, and number of the family members are higher. Then people require the crops which has more productivities. It means that they require more production on smaller piece of the land, and for this type of the agriculture is practiced, that is the intensive. It is intensive in its total productions, intensive in per hectare productions and output, and it is a subsistence. It means that the mainly food crops. What are the features of this? First, very small holdings, as earlier we have discussed, and the reason even I have thrown light on this. Farming is very intensive. It means that even a smaller portion of the land is not left uncultivated. Okay, for this there is a formula, and that is the crop intensity. In states like Punjab, Haryana, there is a very high crop intensity. Meaning of the crop intensity, that uh, total area, how many times it is cultivated in an agricultural year. Okay, suppose that one farmer having 10 hectare piece of the land. Out of this 10 hectare, during, for example, during Kharif season, farmers they cultivate entire 10 hectares. In Rabi season, suppose they cultivate 6 hectares. So out of 10 hectare, within an agriculture year, but in two seasons, they have used 16 hectares, and then there is a third crop, third season, that is the Jai. Suppose that the same farmer and he uses uh, suppose that 4 hectare piece of the land out of the 10 hectares. So his total, you can say, total gross areas, that is that 10 hectare, and net sown area is 20 hectares. Crop intensity is calculated with this formula. So 20 divided by 10 into 100, that is the 200. So in state like Punjab, Haryana, Western Uttar Pradesh, Northern Rajasthan, here crop intensity is very high, approximately 200%. Next is much hand labor is entailed. It's very simple, as people, and they have more number of the people in the family, and most of the time they don't have any work. Okay, it is a kind of the disguised unemployment. So all the people, whether they required or not, but they are involved in the farming works, and that's why they avoid any kind of the expenditures on use of the machineries, use of the technologies, and most of the work it is done by hand. And another thing, that the most common crop of this type of agriculture is rice. And as we know that from the activity of transplantation of the paddy to harvesting crops, most of the work it is done by the hand only. Use of animal and plant manures. Farmers' affordability is very limited. That's why they use manures. Actually, in India, uh, it is the mixed farming models. It means that the farmers, they use the same piece of the land for growing crops and same piece of the land for rearing animals. So all the animal waste, they use it for the you can say to increase or improve the fertility of the soil. Dominance of paddy and other food crops, as earlier I have mentioned, because these crops, paddy, it has per hectare production of this crop is higher. Another thing, that the storage, paddy requires minimum storage capabilities. People in India, they don't have, you can say that the big houses as the poor people. That's why they are not able to manage a separate storehouse. That's why uh, the sharing, that the storage of the paddy is easier, and its per hectare production is higher. That's why mainly in intensive subsistence farming, paddy, that the rice is most important crop. Next is practiced in area of high population pressure on land. As earlier we have mentioned that it is mainly practiced in Southeast Asia and South Asian countries, where population as well as population density is higher, and that's why more people require more food crops, and that's why intensive farming is practiced. High doses of biochemical inputs and irrigations. As we know that the people require more productions, and to meet this need, this requirement, they use irrigation facilities, whether the canal irrigation, well or tube well, or ponds, you can say that the for growing crops. Next is commercial farming. As its name suggests, this is a kind of the farming that is practiced to sell the product in the market. It is produced, or this type of crops are grown for market purpose or for selling purpose. One thing, children, I want to say that some crops in some particular regions they are grown as the subsistence crops, while in another areas they are grown as commercial farming. You take the example like wheat in Punjab, wheat and rice in Punjab. Farmers of Punjab and Haryana, they grow rice to sell it in the market, while people of Bengal, they grow rice to meet the family requirement. I have given the example of the maize, corn, that is in India or in some developing and backward countries. It is grown as a food crops, while in United States of America, it is grown as a commercial crops. Farmers grow maize to feed their animals because it has certain you can say the properties. Cellulose is one of them. Having eaten maize, animals gain their weight, and that's why it is profitable for their meat market or meat business. That's why one crop, that is the maize, grown in India as subsistence farming, while the same maize or the corn called in United States of America, it is a commercial farming. So it's a very simple, a type of farming where farmers' sole concern is to sell the crop in the market. What are the features of it? First, it is a large scale production. Even in some areas, per hectare production is lower, but total production is very high. When we talk about the Canada, country like Canada, where per hectare production of wheat is lower than India, but total production is higher because it is practiced on a huge or on a big land. It is capital intensive. It means that this type of farming, it requires modern technologies, tools, seeds, machines, and all these you can say that the tools, they have very high cost. That's why it is not middle class farmers or poor farmers cannot afford commercial farming. Next is use of high yielding variety seeds. When we talk about these seeds, they are insect resistant, they have short time or they complete their lifespan in short time. Productivity of these seeds are higher. Insect attacks are lower, and that's why high yielding variety seeds are used. Next is produced for sale. Okay, as earlier we have mentioned, that is the only concerns of growing these crops, that is to sell in market. Heavy machinery and human labor is required. Mostly this type of agriculture, and it is not possible without the use of the machines, tractors, threshers, harvesters, and plows, many other you can say machines required. And not only the machines, even lots of technical support is also required. In certain foreign countries, here farmers, they just collect the sample of the soil and send it to the soil laboratories, and then the scientists of the soil laboratories, they suggest them whatever the crops, what variety of the seeds to be grown, what or which fertilizers, which pesticide to be used. And most of the work, you can say that agriculture is totally computerized in such areas, done in a large areas. It means that this type of farming mainly practiced in the areas where land is available and population is even lower, like United States of America, like Canada, and certain other countries of the world where population is lower. That's why sufficient land is available. So on the large areas, bigger areas, this type of the agriculture is practiced. Next is farm system under operation all year round. Meaning of it, as earlier I have mentioned, that it is likely computerized farming. And here uh, farmers, it is the purely a secondary activities. That's why they manage their farms, that every time throughout the years they grow crops. Like in extreme summer, when there is no rainfall, but people manage to grow crops with the help of the irrigations, and they grow the crops that requires less amount of the waters, like the vegetable, etc. So it means that it is purely a business activities. That's why as a businessman cannot lock or keep close his shop for many days, in the same way farmers as well. There is one form of this type of agriculture, and it is the plantation farming. Actually, plantation farming, it is a colonial, you can say, activities. When certain European companies, and they established their colonies in countries like India and certain other areas where they required crops to be grown for their uh, uh, industries, and that's why they promoted plantation farming. As its name suggests, it is basically a agriculture of the plants. It means once they grow the plant, and these plants, they provide output crops to the next 10 to 15 years. Here cash crops for international markets. First feature of this, only cash crops, because there is no concern of growing crops for the family requirement. They just grow crops for the international markets or for the demand of industries. Single crops are grown. Okay, in one areas a single crop is grown. Like in, if you talk about the northeast or in Assam, it is a tea only. In country like Brazil, it is coffee. So one crop only it is grown here, practiced on large fields. As earlier we have mentioned, that it is because of the colonial governments, they required more productions, and because of this uh, they practice this type of the farming on the large fields. Large labor force required. Here, as and when you talk about the certain islands, okay, if you talk about the present day West Indies country, it has certain islands. Georgetown is there, Georgetown is there, and many others are there. And in these, you can say, small islands of the West Indies, you will find large number of the native Indians live there. You see, you take the example of the Fiji. Approximately half of the population are of Indian natives. So, with the establishment of the colonial government, they required labor, and these large number of the Indian laborers, they migrated to these areas and they settled there. So for this type of the farming, in the for example, if you talk about the tea is a labor, you can say, oriented farming, because most of the work it is done by people only. Machines cannot select or collect the leaves. In the same way, it is a labor oriented farming. Huge capital investment, definitely, as the land is bigger. Production is required. Production is mainly for industries. That's why after getting the crops, they require immediately send it to the market, and for this they required uh, bigger machines, tools, transportations, and for this there is a huge capital investment required. Develop transportation to transport factories for processing. Yes, as earlier we have discussed that this farming is practiced only for one purpose, to grow crops for the industries, for the requirement of the industries. And industries are located in the cities. That's why uh, these type of the agriculture, wherever it is practiced, there is a better development of transportation facilities. Latest technologies and modern methods are used, definitely, because when we talk about the industries, and if it require, okay, you can understand about it that if a factory and if it doesn't get raw material on time, you can understand the further, you can say, result of it. That's why uh, all technology required, they are modern. Crops are mainly exported and earn foreign exchange. As earlier, as I have mentioned, that India is one of the leading tea producers and largest exporter of the tea. Brazil is largest producer as well as exporter of coffee. So when they export these crop commodities to the foreign countries, then it enhance, you can say, that the countries foreign, you can say, currencies in their treasuries. Tea, coffee, sugarcane, rubber, etc. are some crops which are cultivated. You can see that these are like the trees or the plants, and once they are grown, they give the crops for certain years. So such type of the crops are grown this in these areas. Thank you, children.